When I think about, for example, like competitive athletes, we know that there's something different about them. And often it's something different physiologically. It's a different distribution of, let's say, slower, fast twitch fibers. Or, Michael Phelps has this kind of webbing, right? Supposedly, he's got this, ridiculous arm span. And there's all these very special things that make athletes, in many cases, particularly suited to what they do. What can you tell us about, in particular, people who go into space, people who dedicate their lives into that kind of travel? What is it about them spiritually or conceptually that makes them maybe more open to these experiences or more comfortable in the places that many of us would not be?
That's, a question I guess a lot of astronauts gets asked is that why did you choose it, or what inspired you? And I think a beautiful example is Alexei Leonov, who was the first person to walk in space. So he did the first spacewalk. And I happened to have a conversation with him, and I asked him, why did you start flying? And he said, I wanted to see the clouds closer, because at that time there was no space flight when he began. And he's actually driven by art. So he's an artist at the start, and he wanted to draw and capture his fascination with what clouds are. And I guess there was there's not much description of what the clouds were at the time when he was younger. So he wanted to just be among the clouds because he wanted to draw them. And that's how he became a pilot, and then a pilot who was, working on special planes. And then he got selected to go to space. And he was in space. He developed a method on how we to date, when the seasons change, the color change in agricultural settings. And so he was the first one to bring colored pencils into space and actually colored on how the changes were happening across, I guess, the fields of view that he could observe. And that's when the Earth observation direction became. And because he had special color perception as an artist, he brought that in, I guess, that talent. And I found when speaking with astronauts, a lot of them are multi-talented. Majority of them play an instrument. A lot of them, would do different kinds of sports. They could be engineers, but they will have a flair for, philosophy or arts. And if they, sometimes they come from arts. Well, there are medical flow, right? People who are medical professionals, but also there are technical people. But no matter whom you cross, they are thriving to solve a challenge. There's no task small enough. I guess the Soviet aspect of the cosmonauts, they would say that they have to repair all the equipment in the house before they go up, because as soon as they leave the house, something will go wrong in the house. And so there is always like a backup family, and they live in Star City, and they look after each other, because as soon as, they used to be majority, actually until very, very recently, they were mostly men in USSR and Russian Federation, the cosmonaut corps. And so something would go wrong, but they would always repair and do everything by hand, because of course in space you can't, call a plumber or somebody else, but also what's interesting is they are equally really good at following instructions and being so clear on detail oriented as also driving the situation or the problem solving. So it's quite interesting to have this, in a sense, leadership and also humbleness and appreciation of the team. That's quite interesting too.
I had a good friend who was a 5-time world champion kickboxer, and she described that when she was fighting, she would lose sense of time and space, and there was a part of her brain that started to operate purely from instinct. And when she thought back to the fight, some of them she couldn't remember, and it was only in the moment right before a knockout where she would snap to and have an awareness of whether or not she should strike or not. And I'm curious about the extrasensory perception that happens in high pressure situations and what you've learned about people developing an extra sense or multiple senses to either be aware of incoming danger. What insight have you gleaned about additional senses for people in these situations?
This is usually not explored in kind of classical science, but I have been always interested, and that was my interest grown from martial art, because you rely on your spider senses or extra sensors, or your vision and perception behind you. And we did a lot of work with eyes closed, and also having kind of contact where you don't lose contact, but you had to guess and work together in seeing, determining the flow without pushing or pulling. And that gave me an interest in understanding, how do I know where, what this person is likely to do next. And also what is interesting in that perception, if we are worried, if we've got a sense of fear, then the perception narrows, and there is a gap in our spider sense or in our perceptual capacity, whatever we may call it, extrasensory perception, intuition, interoception in some capacity. And so I found that, and similar with astronauts that we discussed before, like, there's no fear, there is no, it's a healthy risk management. And as soon as we become worried, we seem to unable to almost like take that extra sensory perception. And I don't know, have you met Dean Radin?
We haven't, but we've spoken to a lot of people in extrasensory abilities and psi phenomenon and telepathy.
Cool. So that bunch, from IONS, and they have done experiments about perception, and that our body to different capacity can predict what would be the next event in milliseconds upfront. And it's different from so our brain waves that we can measure, encephalogram, cardiogram, and also galvanic skin response. And so that was interesting to me also to understand on how can we extend that time perception, widen that gap of how can we do it. And I've actually did put a grant together, which I never thought will go through. But it did go through, but I felt pregnant, and it didn't. I wasn't able. I had high expectation that I'll have the baby and do the contract and work perfectly well. But that was first time being a mom, and that was not realistic. So that did not happen. So there was a people who are dismantling dangerous equipment that could blow up or in the field, and they were clearly successful because they were doing it over and over, and they did not know how to teach that, because also the training is so challenging that people who would come to train would with time will leave the training, because they would understand the seriousness and the problem of what they're getting into, that they wanted to know, for one, to find the capability of something that you can't predict, that intuitive sense of what to do despite, I guess, the pressure, the circumstance, and also reading the clues that you don't know what are the clues. And so the idea was to get into and maybe extend those tests that they did at IONS and repeated across the globe on that millisecond prediction of doing it or not doing it. And how does this work? And so, and tapping into those sensations and allowing other people to scan for the clues, because part of our previous work was to do designing problem-solving tools for long-duration missions. And the idea is that people have to solve problems with minimum resources. And what that entails is that we need to be systematic, but also be creative and be open to opportunity. And if we can be systematic in creativity, which sounds awkward, right? How could you be systematic in creativity? But it's almost like you direct your attention to one field at a time and allow the time for creativity to unfold before you move on to the next thing. Because our mind has this capacity, sort of, once you've got the solution, that's done. I don't want to be working anymore on that. But in actual fact, if we can be systematic, we can work out the solutions and then find the more practical or the one that we have resources, rather than just having one. So that was the idea. And part of that, I wanted to merge the part of that inner innate sensing plus the systematic observation skills. So I wanted to see if they do have that scan intuitively and the idea is to use that pre-verbal knowing, which I was using for designing aircraft cockpits, and allowing the people to articulate the intuition. So something that we deeply know, but don't know how to explain, or we don't even realize we know. But or we think everybody knows it, it's a common sense, which often it isn't.
Well, I think this is one of the most interesting and applicable areas, is having a deep knowing or a sense of knowing, or being able to anticipate something that may happen either milliseconds or further in the future. And how do we develop that? And I think people who are listening, there's a mix. Some people who are deep down the rabbit hole of developing their extra senses, and some people who are listening to this conversation for the first time and trying to make sense of, is this really possible? How does it work on a practical level? I hear people who talk about intuition, but I can't really figure it out. So I want to try and walk through this. And I think one way to do that would be to hear a little bit more about your personal experience. I've heard you talk about Aikido, which is a martial arts, but you can describe a little bit about what it is and how you started to develop this, as you call it, spidey sense. And that will take us, I think, into how it progresses for people, like what's possible in practicing this martial arts and how it translates to our everyday lives.
Good point. Everybody should do martial art, I think, and find their, inspiration from the spirit of art, because it's about exploration of who we are, and also collaborating with the environment. And what I loved about Aikido is that it was about, first of all, observation, and then allowing things to happen without forcing or intervening. And it was allowing to take what's coming and work with that. And I thought the whole concept of being it's not non-judgmental, but allowing for whatever motion to happen and just join with that flow and work with that flow. And that not knowing of what will happen, despite having some, moves that we would learn. But the idea is that you then, once you practice them, you're watching where the energy would take you, and you would be intuitively following, especially if there's a weight difference, of whoever is coming onto you, and allowing for that to circle. And the idea is that you look for where the energy would want to go, meaning the weight, for example, or speed or momentum, and where you can carry it in such a way that it's deflecting.
And if someone has not ever seen Aikido, I'll try to explain it to them and you can correct me. Unlike other martial arts, you're not like going through and practicing or demonstrating. My understanding of it is that you're in an interaction with someone comes towards you, so that's the motion coming towards you, and you transfer that forward motion either into bypassing it or flipping or rolling together. So in, a metaphor for life, life is coming at you. You don't get to decide what's coming at you, and you have to then respond and react to that force to transmute it, keep yourself safe. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes. The idea is that you step away slightly or step back and allow for that momentum to come. And then you take that, whatever is coming. If you can step away completely, that's ideal, right? But if you can, then you just take it and you move across. So you almost like step away, and let's say by pulling the hand, you then circle around you, because that's how you can redirect the momentum, and person gets out of balance. So it's about spiraling and seeing where the weight will fall. So you're looking to create disbalance while yourself maintaining grounding.
I think where I was leading, so that people can understand it, and a little bit I think about Neo from the Matrix with the bullets. He's like, time slows down a little bit, and this connects to what you were saying about fear. If you're in a feared state and someone is rushing towards you, you don't have an instinct, right? It's not a logical set of decisions that you need to make to say, oh, if this person is coming, then I see this angle. There's something happening very, very quickly in our processing to know where to move. And it's almost beyond the rational mind.